Well, John, welcome again. And,
Thanks for having me back, Catherine.
Look, am I misreading this, or is it a bit unusual for the G7 to be as forward-leaning on geostrategic issues? It's tended to be an economic debating society in the past, has it not?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It has tended to be that in the past, but the world's changed. It's not what we faced a few years back, and the issues of today are much more linked to the issue of contestation, and it's hard to tease out economics from strategy at the moment. And we're seeing that manifest in Australia, particularly with the sanctions, the trade sanctions that are clearly not about trade, but about punishment and about exertion of Chinese power.
And indeed, John Lee wrote a very informative piece, I thought, this week. John's a good China analyst, and he said he thinks that there's the beginnings of a blowback against them, and perhaps the coming summit might see that. I noticed the Japanese stepped in behind us in the dual summit with Maurice Payne and Peter Dutton this week. What was your interpretation of that? Is that leading us closer to a more formalised Quad now, do you think?
Well, it's very heartening to see the Japanese support Australia's position. And this is the thing, people are saying that Japan's had a more nuanced approach towards engagement than we have had. But the bottom line is that Japan has been subject to quite significant pressures, particularly over the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands, with really significant frequency of military interventions in their space that we haven't faced,
They were pretty direct, I thought, this week in their language, and referring to the East Asian zone in particular. I thought that was the most direct language I'd heard from a Japanese emissary. What did you make of that?
No, I completely agree. There's a real recognition, it appears, in Japan that it's in their interests to support Australia and to not let Australia be hung out to dry. And of course, the Morrison government's approach has been a bit risky in terms of the rhetoric it's used, and it's copped a lot of criticism for what they've had to say. But what we're seeing is that essentially, it's relatively speaking, it's quite benign, and it's especially when you compare it to what the Chinese are saying. The kinds of remarks that's coming out of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are remarkably barbed. The threat of war, the threat of striking us first.
Telling us
we're not remotely in that league.
It's really quite insulting.
It's patronising, and it's very assertive, very acerbic.
And as we've discussed before, there's a brittleness about it, isn't it? It sounds like the bad old days of Radio Peking during the Vietnam War. But
indeed.
But look, this week, the PM, of course, is meeting President Biden at this summit, and there's some talk that this could mature into a D10, like the Democratic Liberal democracies. We'll await on that event. But closer to home, Peter Dutton said some pretty direct things at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute yesterday as well, and we've got a quick grab of him.
Do you anticipate that there's scope for more Marines in the north, US naval vessels operating out of Stirling?
Yes, I do.
More pre-positioning of equipment?
Yes.
You think that's a potential sort of further step in terms of...
I think that is in our own security interest, and I think it's in the interest of the United States as well. I think concentrating assets in, particular locations, has a long history of good and bad outcome, and I would have thought that the United States, would be giving consideration to that.
Well, I'd never say no to more US Marines, John, but the fact is it's no substitute for getting our own house in order, is it? And the announcement about the Collins class being extended today is probably more in keeping with where we really need to be.
Yeah, so I would make a couple of observations. Firstly, we're already allied with the United States. We're committed to them working with them and us working with them. So the quantity of personnel and assets here, in my view, is neither here nor there in broad terms. I mean, in terms of Chinese taking a front, that's already happened. I don't think it's really a big of a game changer. The big issue is that we have a boutique defence force.
Yes.
And it's designed for the unipolar moment when the United States was uncontested top dog. That's no longer the case. We face a set of circumstances very different to the past, and we have a Defence Force that has not really grown to match the growth of challenges in our neighbourhood. Now, the investment in the Collins submarine makes a lot of sense. They're extremely capable already, but we need to keep them on the edge in terms of capability improvement, in terms of giving them flexibility of what they can do and how long they can be sustained and how effective they can be into the future. Mindful, of course, that we've got a real challenge in terms of the follow-on submarine project.
Yeah, I guess reading between the lines, it looks like their time out of the water for this maintenance will be almost a rebuild. They'll be son of Collins, as they're known in the trade. What do you see that being capable of doing? Will they start to deliver unmanned systems underwater? Do you think that's the end game here?
It's got a feature. Unmanned, unattended sensors are the new normal. Everybody's getting into them. We need to be getting into them for the subsurface, surface, and aerial platforms as well. That makes a lot of sense. So if we're not doing that with the Collins upgrade, we need to be having a long, hard look at ourselves about it. Absolutely. Because it's clearly critical.
And look, we've talked about grey zone warfare before, and just to round this out tonight, I noticed Mike Pizzullo, whom we both have worked with and under at various times around the defence and intelligence traps, giving evidence at estimates about strengthening our infrastructure. I think Mike Burgess, very direct about probability. That was a pretty big call for a serving ASIO head to say the probability of a domestic terrorist incident on Australian soil. What's your sense about whether our bases here are hard enough? We've got people who started business as parking operators controlling security at ADF bases. Is that good enough?
Well, it's a good question. And, I'd have to defer to ASIO as to the advice that they're giving to Defence about the risks that they face. I guess one of the things is that it does vary from base to base. What happens in Townsville is not going to be the same as what happens at Holsworthy because of the accessibility and the ease of somebody being able to do something nefarious. We've had that in the past. I think 2008 there was a plot against Holsworthy.
Commandos, yeah.
And the bases, to be fair, have improved their security. So the base security of today is not the one that we knew when we were wet behind the ears.
Sure.
But I think that you're making a very good point. The security measures do need to be reviewed, do need to be doubled down upon, and we do need to be thinking about how to respond to what Mike Burgess is saying, what advice he's offering, and what that means for the posture of the defence bases. This is something that works really with the local authorities as well. We need to work closely with state police, local community groups, making sure that our bases, that our people at our bases are aware of what's going on in the neighbourhood and are prepared for contingencies that might arise.
Indeed. I must confess to being very surprised at his choice of language on that particular matter, and we'll look forward to hopefully...
Well, see, this is one of the things... We've been in a set of circumstances where we've been quite lucky. We've been very, very successful. We've nipped a lot of attacks, imminent attacks in the bud, and we've got to the point where we're kind of a little bit complacent about our circumstances, a little bit like with COVID, We're pretty good at staying on top of things, but you only have to be not so good once.
It's like the soccer goalkeeper, you only have to miss once and it's
Bingo.
on the board. John Blaxland, as always, a pleasure. We'll talk to you as this unfolds, I'm sure, the
Thanks,
breaking issues across the Indo-Pacific. Thank you for your time.